Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'm Nathan, the community manager here at Guidebook, and we're really excited to be getting into another Guidebook Meets. And Natasha, I'm pleased to have you joining us in the hot seat today, really getting into all of the work that you're doing at Coastal Carolina, not just talking about Guidebook, but also talking about orientation and a little bit about you and your background as well. So firstly, thank you so much for joining us for today's session. How's it going?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, we're doing great. The chaos of orientation has subsided, so we're getting back to business as usual. So yeah, doing really, really well.
Good. Yes. Well, we're pleased to have you here. And for those that are joining us, just as a reminder, feel free to share your questions. There is a Q&A and a chat feature. So yeah, pop your questions in there throughout for Natasha and we'll get to those. We'll definitely have some dedicated time at the end, but if something crops up and it makes sense to tackle it throughout, we will also jump in. So yeah, as much as I've got a bunch of questions for you, Natasha, we hope that people watching today will bring a little bit bring some of their questions to us as well. But anyway, for now we'll dive right in. And I think firstly I'd just love to understand a bit about your role, what drives your passion for student transition work, and maybe just share a little bit about your experience at Coastal Carolina, what you love about that chaos of orientation season.
Amazing. Sure. So my official title is the Associate Director for Student Transition and Engagement. And so I work within the Orientation, Transition, and Family Programs office. So I'm kind of that transition piece. And so some of my main focuses that I get to do out of our office are I serve as the advisor for Tau Sigma, which is our Transfer Honor Society on campus. And I also coordinate all of our transfer student programming, which is really cool. So we do National Transfer Student Week that's coming up in October, which is a national initiative. And then I'm also tasked with doing our class programs, which is kind of something brand new we just started this year. We focus on programming for sophomores, juniors, and seniors, kind of creating standing events that happen every year as those students rise up in their academic journey. So I get to help curate those events. And one of the biggest pieces of my role is coordinating our Welcome Week program. So we call that Teal Nation Welcome. It flows directly from Teal Nation orientation. So it's kind of that handoff after students come to orientation over the summer, then they come back to campus, move in, and then we kind of take over from there. So we have a full week of programs that I get to organize. So on the official side, that's kind of where I sit for a majority of the year. And then talking about what I love about orientation season, truthfully, for me, it's really two things. More on the experiential side for the students who are incoming. I think I absolutely enjoy getting to see them making connections with other students early on. Because I think that I've seen that they are so much more successful and wanting to get involved if they can even just make that one connection. And so one of my favorite things is you see two people that meet each other at an orientation session, and then a few weeks later in August, whenever they move back on campus, you see them at Teal Nation Welcome events together. And so they've kind of maintained that relationship. And I think that's what so much of coming to school is about, being able to find your people, find your friends. And so that's one piece. And then on the other side, I love to see our student orientation team really, really grow tremendously throughout the entire orientation season because we do so much training on the front end, trying to get them as prepared as we can. We try to get them in tune with, okay, this is what scenarios you can be in, and then actually seeing them do the job and be able to interact with the students and the families. And then when they come out at the end of the summer, it's like they are almost completely different in terms of their confidence, in terms of their knowledge. So that's one of my favorite things to see is our student staff develop throughout that orientation process.
I love that. I love that anecdote you shared about, seeing people connect at an event on campus and then later down the line, like that next event, that next moment when people come together, they're still there and that bond, that connection, that experience for the student is developing over time. And it really, for me, it's like, one of the things I've always loved about events more broadly is just that power of in person, that power of human connection, and the importance of bringing people together whenever or wherever that may be. So yeah, I love that anecdote to kind of kick things off in our discussion today. And you know, you're doing a lot. It sounds like a lot's going on, and um, there's much we can get into, but I guess like let's just dive into the reality of orientation planning. And for 2025, like what did that look like? Like what was the focus for you and your team this year?
Absolutely. So our goal, if I had to put it down to one word this year, would be elevate. So last year, our program, we kind of scrapped what our previous program had looked like. So we started from scratch last year. So kind of figuring out, okay, what's going to work, what's not going to work. And so this year, going into planning for 2025, we kind of had like a list of things that we were like, okay, we like how this is going, but we can do better. How can we make this go more smoothly? How can we improve this experience? Everything down to our check-in process. Our check-in process was completely different from last year. We saw that's an area that we can definitely improve upon, especially that being the very first impression that students and their families have coming to orientation, wanting to make sure that, okay, we're starting off the day on a good foot. We're not having to worry about having some issues, problems like at 8 in the morning. And so we really were focusing on the details and even things like where the students were walking from building to building. We literally created visual maps for our student leaders as they're walking their students. Okay, what makes the most sense? We have construction going on in this area. This is actually a really scenic route. They'll probably take a lot. So just trying to think about different ways to improve upon the foundation that we made last year and really elevate the experience and elevate the program.
Okay, I love that. What drove that change, I guess, last year? What was the thinking behind like we need to rip this up, we need to go again? And obviously that led into this year's strategy. Like why make that change? Why think, you know, start from
Absolutely.
scratch?
Yeah, I think a big reason for us is we had kind of had a stale program previously. We kind of done the same thing year to year and it works, but we realized that, okay, our students actually having the best experience. Is this the best way that we could be sharing certain information? So we kind of did a overhaul of, okay, let's figure out what are the core items that we know we want students to know. And then figuring out the next step, how do we want them to get that information? So for some folks, last year we tried out some different formats. Some of them do more of the traditional lecture style where they're getting on the big stage and we're talking to everybody. So we introduced a lot of different panels this past year. We did one last year and now we did two this year. So we were trying to think about, okay, what are those little changes we can make? Maybe the information's the same, but how can we hopefully get it to where they're retaining the information and actually enjoying the orientation experience?
And are you bringing students into that decision making process, into that feedback loop, obviously going from like I guess last year to this year? Is that something that you're working in sort of collaboration with them on?
Yeah, so I would say the most direct way that we do that is we do an assessment. So at the end of last year, at the end of each orientation session, students were asked to complete essentially a survey. And
Mm.
so they had to rank and leave comments about certain sessions. What would you improve about this? Is there anything you want us to know about the program? We kind of left a lot of those open-ended, trying to see if we can get maybe some specific tidbits of information that maybe we can use to improve the program moving forward. So that is definitely what we use primarily to make some of those judgment calls going into this year, is to look at that feedback and say, okay, let's look at the percentages. We're seeing 80% of people said this presentation is great. This presentation is sitting at a solid, say 30. Okay, what are some of the changes that we need to make to get those numbers up? And so that was really, really successful. And we got a lot of feedback from that. Since we had it embedded into the program, it was something that they essentially had to do before they left. We were able to get a lot of results.
That's amazing. I want to come back to, yeah, I guess the notion of today's conversation, and you mentioned it at the start, you're through the chaos of orientation week, which is always a good feeling. But I guess like why can orientation feel like chaos? Like what are those challenges that really come up throughout orientation week? And that could be in the planning and the execution. Like what does chaos mean to you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that can make orientation feel very chaotic is we plan so much. We plan as much as we can ahead of time, but there's always things that kind of throw a wrench in. And the things that maybe we couldn't have accounted for, weren't able to account for. And so we're having to do changes in real time while we have hundreds of people on campus that are going through our program. And so trying to figure out, okay, what are things that we can prepare ourselves for, maybe have alternate ideas for, but then there's some things that happen where we would just have to kind of think on our feet and utilize our team and the people around us to try to make the best decision possible in the moment. Because at the end of the day, we're like, okay, we got that program to run. And I think that's what it is. It's almost like that ticking clock of like, okay, we only have them on campus for, such a finite amount of time. How do we make the most of that, even if all these other factors are going on? So I think we definitely try to plan as much as we can, but realistically, there's so many things that happen, especially as you're bringing not only incoming students to campus, but their family members and supporters. We found that that can be really interesting because sometimes they have some different needs or things that come up. And so not only are we having to cater to the students to make sure that they feel successful and ready to start in the fall, but also their family members come with their own questions, concerns, all of those things. So we're also having to account for that as well. So that can all feel like a lot whenever you're taking all of that in while at the same time trying to keep everyone on track and keep the program running.
And how do you like in that environment, how do you kind of maintain a sense of control, for yourself, maybe for the team, the volunteers, those who are kind of supporting the whole operation? How do you kind of not lose your mind throughout that process?
Yeah, I think something that really helped is when we had changes such as location changes, if we had an announcement, anything like that. Very early on in the program, we introduced them to Guidebook, and so they all hopefully download the app, have it, and so we're able to make a lot of those changes digitally, and they automatically are updated, which is a huge relief for us because we do get, of course, a lot of questions throughout the day. Oh, what are we doing next? What's coming up? And so if we do have a change, we're able to really quickly make that. And how we kind of delegate that amongst our team, we have a handful of us that are responsible for making those updates. So it's very easy and clear of, hey, this just happened, so and so, are you good to make that change? Yep, no problem. And so we can go in and make that change very quickly. And I think the other huge piece that also really helps kind of playing into that is delegation. So we have layers built within the team. So we have, of course, a professional staff. We have a grad over the summer that helps us out. And then we have like our student lead team and then our orientation leaders. So we kind of have those different layers. So, and they all have a very specific job within the program. And so I think figuring out who we need to communicate with in a timely fashion is super important. So we have a student leader that's dedicated specifically to the students. So if we're worried about, oh, the student small group, there's a change, something's come up, we know exactly who we need to go to. And who we maybe need to communicate that with to make that change. So I think that has really helped us. Previously, everything was very generalized, like a lot of like our upper leadership positions were just kind of like, okay, like you're overseeing the staff. But now we've kind of fine-tuned it to where, okay, this person is specifically over this area while the program's running, which is really great because we have, for instance, like feather flags outside. We have a student lead that is specifically over all of our materials. And so if we're like, hey, it's about to start to pour, those are going to get ruined. We know exactly who we need to go to. And so they can make that adjustment while the program's happening and everything seems seamless on our side. So I would say delegation is another huge portion that can help it kind of manage that chaos maybe in real time.
And are these things that, you're looking at every year after the event's taken place? And again, you talked a lot about refinement and elevation and, do you kind of consider these components of the planning phase of like, how do we evaluate what we did and take steps to improve these processes?
Absolutely. And I think we as a staff, as professional staff, take a lot of time meeting with each other after orientation happens to kind of debrief almost the experience and like, hey, like, how did this go for you? Because sometimes the way that we have the program, there are multiple things happening at once, especially with our family program. So the students might be in one building doing a small group and family members are in a completely different building getting a presentation. And so professional staff wise, we are in a multitude of areas. And so I think it's helpful whenever we come together because I might say, oh, I actually haven't seen that portion of the program. Can you tell me a little bit about how that went? If you needed additional support, what needs to change? So we really do have a lot of conversations about what that looks like. Because sometimes just talking it out helps. Like, so it doesn't have to be as structured. A lot of ours just start as conversations, or if someone has an idea, sometimes even when the program was happening, if someone had a thought, and shared it, we were like, okay, cool, we can actually make that change right now. Other things, it was like, okay, maybe that's a change we can do next year. But we're not able to implement it right now because we have certain things set in place, but we can already kind of start thinking ahead of, hey, that's a little change we can make that will already make our program next year better. So it's a lot of just that constant flow of communication and just making sure that we're all keeping each other up to date since we do have such different tasks within the program. I think that's been a tremendous help and just being able to kind of talk through a lot of those scenarios.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you mentioned guidebook, and I guess it would be,
Yeah.
yeah, I shouldn't, jump straight past it, but I'm just curious, just from like your perspective, components of guidebook that are critical to orientation. Like what are those first things you're putting in the app? What has to be in there? What do you feel like really supports you in that execution?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones for us is the map function. That is incredibly helpful. We find over 70% of our students are from out of state. And so
Mm,
there is a potentially high likelihood that our students actually that are coming for orientation have never stepped foot on campus before. They may have applied, accepted all the things sight unseen. So that potentially could be their first time on campus. So they really do not know where they're going. And so I think they heavily use that. Our family members heavily use that. They're always like, oh, where's this? Where's that? So it's very easy and convenient for us to say, hey, you know that app that we had you download whenever you first came in today? You can actually pull that up and we actually have a maps function for you. So you can see we're right here, right now, and this is where you're going to be going. That's been incredibly helpful for sure. Because it's sometimes hard whenever you're talking with somebody to kind of explain, oh, you're gonna go down this sidewalk, then take a right. Like there's no street signs when you're on campus, like in the heart of campus. So trying to direct someone can be difficult. So it's much easier for our staff to pull up the guidebook app and just say, hey, like look at this maps function and we can show you the path right here. And it's much, much easier. And I think especially for those folks that are visual people, like actually be able to see it is a lot more helpful for them. And of course, this is probably the obvious one, but the schedule function, so incredibly helpful. Especially because we have throughout the program, there are times when you get a few students that get a little antsy. And so maybe they walk away from the program. They're like, we're going to get Starbucks. Okay, cool. So they walk away. But then if they have the app, they can easily see, okay, it's this time right now. I know they're in this building doing this session. So
mm,
that's really helpful. Our family members, same thing. They're like, oh, I want to go to the bookstore in the middle of the program. They're like, I just want to stretch my legs. Okay, cool. You have that with you. So you don't necessarily need someone right next to you saying, hey, this is what we're doing. You have that accessible to you. And so you're able to see that in real time. And again, those changes that we're able to make day of are crucial. And even talking about like the presenters, if our presenters change, if we have to shift the schedule, like it really does make it so much easier. So even though on our end, maybe things seem a little nuts because we're kind of shifting things on their side, on the actual participant side, everything still looks seamless for them. So that's been probably the two functions that we utilize the most. And I think we hear the most about, like whenever we get questions and we have interactions with students and their families, that's primarily what we're showing them.
yeah, and I want to dig into the other side, the student side, as it were, because I guess we've focused on yourself and your team, but you know orientation is a busy week. There's a lot going on for students and families. And, how do you recognize if, let's say, students are hitting information overload or, those kind of things that can create overwhelm for people and maybe, that would have a negative impact. Like, how do you, how do you, how do you, how do you highlight that? How do you kind of react to it? What's your philosophy for combating it?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we have consistently done is whenever we have a session, regardless if it is something that the orientation leaders are directly a part of or not, they're always a presence. So there's not any point in the schedule where there's not an orientation staff member at a presentation, which can be a lot because sometimes they split into, for instance, they go to college meetings. And so our larger group of orientation folks, they split up into 6 groups. And so there's 6 different locations on campus. So we make sure that we have an orientation presence primarily because we've had this happen in the past. There's a student that starts to feel overwhelmed. They're like, I need to step out. It's like, great. We have an orientation leader that can come take you to the side. We can go chill out in the hallway and they have somebody there versus, okay, well, now you're in this presentation, you're thinking, what do I do? Like, am I okay to step out? Like, what do I need to do? We like to just have a presence at all of our portions of the program. So that way they know they at least see a somewhat familiar face, because we try to introduce the orientation leaders at the beginning of every session. So even if that's not their small group OL or whatever that looks like, it's at least, okay, this is like another student I can talk to. This is someone I can approach. If they're kind of in that space where they're like, okay, I'm very overstimulated, I need to step out. And then also just for the folks that get antsy, because we definitely have found that when we used to keep them more of like the lecture style sessions where it was like keeping them in the same location and just doing like presenter after presenter, it really did get very, I'm sure, draining after a while because it is a lot of information. And so something that we got some feedback on last year, something that we definitely tried to implement this year was actually moving physical locations, which was kind of shocking because like it's the heat of summer. So like, wow, they want to go out in the 90-degree weather. But we really found that that made a tremendous difference in their engagement because when they were in a certain space, maybe they were there for maybe one or two presentations, but then they were getting up, they were moving, they were talking, and then they were going to a different location for their next session. And then potentially they were coming back. Like there was a lot more movement than previously. And I think that helps a lot because I think just having them sit stationary for potentially hours on end is just a lot. And like, I think anyone would probably get antsy. So I think addressing that and just kind of like, hey, we're naturally going to move about the campus. And it winds up being like an added plus because again, some of them are not familiar with campus. And so they're able to see more of it. Family members love seeing campus and they love walking around. So that's helped a lot. That has really made a tremendous difference. It's just making sure that we're kind of building in those breaks. And even in Guidebook, we try to make it as easy as possible. We even have transition periods like set up as time blocks. And so we'll say transition to Wheelwright Auditorium. Like we'll have specific transitions. So again, if students are like, oh, what are we doing next? Okay, cool. We can see exactly where we're going to be moving and everything is laid out for them. So I think that has definitely helped a lot. And then just in general, our format for a lot of our presentations and things have changed. So we have, again, tried to introduce a lot more panels. We actually did a student panel this last year for our family members, which was really cool. It's more informal, talking about like the student experience. How do you get involved? It's not so much of like, okay, how do meal plans work? It's like, oh, what kind of meal plan do you have? And do you think it's enough? Or like, do you think it's too big of a meal plan? Like, would you get less? So asking more of those specific type of questions, depending on the students that we have in the panel. So we have done that style. Some of our campus partners really like utilizing kind of like a Q&A style. And so they'll have like a QR code up on the screen. People can just type their questions instead of like needing to get a microphone and like kind of do that exchange. They're able just to send their questions and then they can scroll and choose which ones they want to address. And that's worked really, really well. And I think it kind of allows them to actually get to the questions that people want to know. And so that's been really cool and a little bit more interactive. Of course, we still have some that are kind of lecture style, but then there's also like an engagement piece. So we have one where they're learning about the different student organizations, they're learning about Greek life, things like that, traditions on campus, and they actually have like a bingo card that goes with it. So while they're speaking, okay, we covered this topic, you can check this off your bingo card. So it's cool. They come up with like different ways to keep them engaged while still getting them that information. So I think a combination of those three elements has really changed how students are able to engage with the program and to where it's not, oh my gosh, this is so much information. Like I either need to step out or I don't think I'm going to retain this, trying to switch it up for them, trying to move them around and still have that presence.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's a lot, of different components there. I love the fact that one notion of trying to give people the time to move, be mobile, actually allows you to show off campus and get people experience more of the camp, like that secondary positive effect of it, which is super beneficial. You sort of mentioned there a few different things around engagement and like content structure as well, and I'm just curious, obviously coming off the back of recent orientation week, was there a moment where it just felt like this new format, this new style and process, it was working? Like, are you feeling that all of these changes are coming together to give you the impact that you want? Like, how are students feeling? Like, has the attitude changed, or what does that feel like for you and your team?
Absolutely. I think really when we see that it's working, that it's clicking, it's in like the little moments to where our team maybe makes a reference to something, like talking about something that's specific to coastal, and the incoming students are like, oh yeah, like I learned about that. Or they're like, oh, I know what that is. And so I think that's really cool. Like even like the little things of like we have a big seal on campus that like you're not supposed to step on, otherwise you won't graduate, all of that. Those are like the little things that they start to learn during orientation. So when we see them all walking around this seal, I'm like, okay, like they actually like remember things, like they're actually remembering and like retaining what we're sharing with them. And I think it makes honestly the incoming students so much more confident because they feel like, okay, I can jump onto campus and I'm not going to be completely clueless. Like I kind of have a sense of what's going on and what I need to know. I think that's definitely huge because in that welcome week, you can kind of see the students where, okay, like I totally knew what I was doing. I know how to use my meal plan. I know where the mail services office is, so I can go pick up all my packages. Like, because we of course touch upon a lot of that like beginning stuff that they'll do when they come to campus during orientation. And so some of them you can tell are like extremely prepared and they're like, I know what I need to do. So that goes a long way for us because that really helps not only our office but also our other campus partners because they put in so much work over orientation season trying to share this information because they know all the craziness is going to start back in August. And so whenever they have people that just know their processes and they're going to just jump right in, it's such a big help and it kind of takes that additional strain off of them. So when things go really well, it's like those like little moments when you're like, okay, they know what they need to be doing. They kind of have a sense of direction and they're getting like the references.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great. Sounds like it's going really well. And you mentioned as well, and you know, that QR code, people being able to scan and ask
Yes.
questions and things like that. I guess I'm just curious around technology more broadly, not just Guidebook, but that notion of like, how do you use technology or how do you use different components of technology to allow you to balance that idea of like doing something new, but also keeping it simple and helping like it improve a process or improve part of orientation? Like, do you have a kind of strategy around that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think one specific session comes to mind. I think whenever this is probably really big for a lot of folks, but talking about AI, that's been a huge topic of conversation. I think a lot on like the academic side, of course, because there are a lot of question marks there and like how is that all going to work? But we actually last year started implementing a first lecture. So like we're like, oh, this is your first college lecture. But it's specifically talking about AI and not in the sense that it's like, oh, it's scary, like you shouldn't use it, but talking about like this is like actually what it is. And these are all the different ways you can use it. So how can we help you use it successfully if that's what you choose to do? And that has been really, really huge because I think we have our family members and our students in on that presentation. And so that is kind of like their first introduction to like a lecture style session, but it also allows them to get that information because a lot of them I think maybe have heard rumors or they've heard, okay, like I'm kind of scared of what this like whole thing is. So we kind of just lay it out for them and try to be as proactive as possible because some of them we know are already familiar with utilizing something like that and some of them are not. But odds
Mm,
are whenever they get to campus, they'll start hearing about it or know other people that use it. And so I think that's something really cool that we thought would be a great idea. We kind of have formed like a whole office around it on campus. And so I think capitalizing on that audience, especially of incoming students, like we want to set you up for success very early on, like as soon as you get here. And so part of that is going to be, okay, how do you navigate this new technology that's literally still developing? So that's
mm,
one thing that comes to mind. Another one is I think a lot of what has to do with like those folks who are visual. I'm trying to think about, okay, this is a lot of information. How can we kind of help digest that? We do try to have as many visuals as possible. And so even in our student small groups, they have a presentation that's very simple. Like there's normally maybe just like a few words on each slide, just almost as like prompts. So the students can see it. So if there's a lot going on, it's like, oh, I didn't catch what they said, like they at least have an idea of what's going on the screen. And I think that's also really helpful, especially for the folks who are not maybe going to be apt to like raise their hand and be like, hey, like, can you repeat yourself? Or, oh, I
mm,
just completely missed that thought. We're able to kind of have that additional visual cue that's really helpful. Like when they're doing introductions on the screen, it'll say like the things that they're supposed to talk about. So like hometown, they talk about their age, like what their major is. And so they kind of have those things behind them. which is really helpful. I think that we've seen that's like a really simple thing that I'm sure a lot of programs do, just to kind of have those visuals accompany the sessions. But I do think it's really, really helpful. And yeah, they love the good QR codes too. They really do love a good QR code. So yeah, we try to do those little things. Again, a lot of them are simple, but I think they can go a long way.
Yeah, QR codes is the technology or whatever that everyone thought that would sort of have a moment and disappear, but it's here to stay.
Mhm.
QR codes have a lot of value.
Yep.
On the AI component, that presentation that you do, is that you sharing tools that you recommend for students? Is that you just kind of almost doing a, you know, AI beginners conversation, like this is what it is? Like what does that look like? Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think it's kind of twofold. So a good chunk of it is truly talking about how AI was developed, how AI actually functions, like how it gets its information. And then kind of like the last piece of that presentation is tying it back to like coastal specific content. So talking about, hey, like in the syllabus, there will be a piece talking about if you choose to use AI without your instructor's permission, like this is what happens. But
Mm.
some people encourage it. Some of your professors say, hey, you can use AI to brainstorm. So if you just need to, you're writing a paper, if you just need to get some ideas going, that could be a good tool, but recognize kind of where those boundaries are. And
Mm.
it's like now, once you have that foundational knowledge of, okay, this is what it is, this is kind of like the information that it's going to give me. And then they kind of talk about the piece of, okay, we need to make sure we're holding ourselves accountable and that we're not misusing this tool because it can definitely turn into that for some folks, but we could talk about how we can use it to also be successful and how to help you and like maybe even cut down time. Like if you're just trying to get some ideas or if you're even trying to format something. He also mentions, because it's actually one of our like instructors, he mentions how if you need something explained in a different way, and so if you have, say, a math equation and you're like, hey, can you explain this in a format so I can
Mm.
understand? And like you can be very specific in what you ask it to do and it can break it down for you in a different way. So even with that, like that's really cool because they can potentially utilize it almost like you would if you were like going to tutoring per se. If they're like, okay,
Yeah.
let me break it down. It's just such a fast way to do that. So I think just depending on the circumstances, because of course it's not 100% reliable, but for certain things, I think they try to teach them like it's great for this, not great for this. So
Yeah.
kind of giving them those boundaries ahead of time.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's yeah, good to be proactive with that boundary setting and
Yep.
and getting ahead on a lot of that stuff because it's moving very quick and it's changing all the time. So it's definitely good to kind of address that head on. Now I know we're talking to orientation professionals that are watching today or might be watching in the future, and I'm just like you've gone through a process of rethinking the way in which you deliver orientation. You've gone through that change last year, you've iterated this year. And for those who might be thinking about, we need to do something similar or we want to evolve certain components of orientation, what's the kind of first change you would recommend that they make or how they approach this?
That's a great question. I would say, because kind of how our conversation began is like we start small. And so we talked about, okay, what are the things we know we're going to have always? Like, what are like our core pieces that we're always going to continue to have as part of orientation? Because they're like foundational, like the things we need to have. And then we kind of built from there. And so talking about, okay, now that we have what we need, how can we improve upon those processes that we know we're always going to have? And then we kind of filled in the gaps with really trying to figure out like what makes your institution special. So like, okay, cool. Everyone maybe has a dean of students office, but our dean of students talks about how on the first day of class, like you could come meet up and like do donuts with her. Okay, great. So kind of like adding in those pieces that are special to the institution, I think that gets students and their families really excited. And they're like, okay, cool. Like, I know I'm going to college, but like, we're coming to Coastal. Like, this is like a coastal tradition, or this is something that all coastal students know. Whenever we talk about our organizational kickoff day, everyone here calls it OK Day. Like, that's like the lingo. And so during orientation, when they're like learning about that, it's like, okay, we always talk about student involvement. So like, how can we make this specific to coastal? Yes, it's important to get involved, and coastal has this standing event every single year called OK Day that all the students come out to. So I think kind of trying to tie it into what really is like making your institution special and why students love your institution, I think is going to go such a long way, because that just seems very genuine. And it's like, yeah, we're trying to get you this information, but also it's showing because we want to eventually fold you into the coastal community. So kind of tying those two together.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just in terms of, I guess, measuring impact, whether that's through the changes that you've made or measuring impact through utilizing Guidebook or other technology, like, are there things that you're looking out for? Are there things that you're measuring each year to sort of see the impact that changes are having or technology has? Like, what does that look and feel like for you and Coastal?
Yeah, I think we're cool spot. And I'm very fortunate to say that our enrollment has been going up every year, at least since I've been here for the last just over 2 years. And so we just had another record breaking incoming class. And so with that comes kind of its own, I would say, circumstances, potentially challenges on our side of having like to navigate things. And so in terms of impact, like our office had to open orientation registration probably earlier than we ever have before, purely because of the amount of students that we had coming. We're getting so many questions of like, hey, we're coming, like I've been accepted for months, like now I'm ready to come, like I've gotten all my things. So there were certain adjustments that we made kind of to accommodate for that. Because that has been crazy. And I know we definitely are very fortunate to be in that situation. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to handle this influx of students? Because even that few hundred can totally change how we function and how we plan for things. And so we definitely have seen that impact for orientation, opening that registration early, having more sessions, figuring out how we can fit everybody in within
Mhm.
that span of time. And then even like leading into our Teal Nation welcome program, just again, that like slight uptick in the numbers, it was our attendance almost doubled for all of our events that week, and things that maybe we didn't even account for. Like I was really, really shocked to see the turnout. Like I maybe have planned for this much because that's how we had last year. And I mean, the numbers were just staggering. So it really does make a tremendous difference. In a lot of our planning. And I think moving forward, that's something we're going to have to be really cognizant of, hey, like, we maybe are not going to experience as much melt. So we are accounting for a good chunk of new students to be coming. So how do we make sure we're prepared for them and still going to provide that experience? Because now we're accounting for a few hundred more students as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And do you see that, like, that growth? Is that something that you feel like is going to continue, or is that something that you're kind of wary of? Like, have you got some kind of forecasting or ideas around that?
Yeah, I really hope it does. So far, I think in everything that we're kind of looking at forecasting wise, it is. And so like we're already taking into consideration what that's going to look like for next year's summer schedule. Because we try to get in our orientation dates pretty early, just for scheduling purposes, because we still have camps and things going on campus throughout the summer. So that way we're able to secure our dates so then everyone else can kind of fill in around us. So like that planning process is already well underway. So that definitely I think we're still expecting that to still go up, even if it's just slightly. I think we're still expecting that. And so we're kind of making those changes already in our end as we're planning for next year. Because we'll try to announce those dates by the end of the semester. And so our planning process has already begun, because if we do a 2-day model, 1-day model, like regardless of what that looks like, figuring out those dates, because then we start building registration, we start getting that information out to students. So kind of all those dominoes start going down.
Amazing. And just, I guess, last question from me, and then I'm gonna open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions, please, send them through now. Just with that growth and that participation, again, just to kind of, I guess, at the end here, bring it back around to Guidebook. Have you seen that that's increased engagement in your app? Have you seen that that's increased maybe or changed the way in which people integrate with your app as you've evolved your orientation? Like, how's the kind of app evolved with you and changed with you throughout this process?
Yeah, for sure. I think we Along with the whole idea of elevating our program, we've tried to make everything, all the information that we're including on Guidebook as relevant as possible and as easy to comprehend as possible, so that can be a continuous resource that they use. For instance, we had our family weekend registration on Guidebook, so they were able to quickly access that link. We talked about what are your next steps. After you complete orientation, we talked about if you need to do your Teal Nation task list, which essentially like just almost like the online orientation that some folks have, like online modules, basically just things they have to complete before they come to campus, submitting their card for their student ID, things like that. So that's been very, very useful for sure, because they've been able to kind of refer back to that. And we have gone completely paperless. So we just use Guidebook for all of those purposes throughout the program. We don't have any paper copies of the schedule for a lot of reasons. It's a huge cost-effective way to do that. Printing can be expensive. And one of our biggest things is we hate printing schedules because more than likely things are going to change. And then you're going to have somebody that has that physical copy and they're going to say, oh, well, I thought this was happening at this time. And we're like, actually, we've made an update. Like, so it's one of those things that can get dicey. And so we definitely have pushed that really hard this year. And they're able to access the Guidebook app as soon as they register for orientation. So that's how they can go ahead and access the schedule if they'd like. Because again, we try not to give them like a PDF version or like Word version of the schedule. So that way they can see if things change as they're changing, like they're just updating, and they have access to that throughout the entire process. So I think it's been really cool. And we've integrated the Guidebook into our check-in process. So that's something new that we haven't done previously. We started that this year with our new and improved check-in process. That was the final step of check-in. So as they kind of go through the line, they get their name tags, all their little materials, and then we have really cool signs that we've made that have little QR codes that take them directly to the Guidebook app. And we're like, hey, go ahead and download this, because then during our welcome, which they do right after check-in, we elaborate more on like, hey, this is what you're going to use this for today. You've already got it downloaded, because then you don't have hundreds of people trying to download it at the same time in the auditorium. So that's been a huge help. And that way they're already able to see, as they're having their continental breakfast, okay, this is what we're up for. This is what we're doing throughout the day. So I could say those changes have definitely been really impactful, especially with Guidebook.
And do you feel that that's helped with, I guess, adoption and use then by having it as part of that check-in process and people downloading it? Have you seen sort of a measurable impact there?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And what's really interesting is, for sessions wise, we saw that the students and their families were really accessing our evening activities session, because we listed out like what are evening activities for those who opted in to have the overnight experience, which is super interesting. That was kind of surprising to me, and our team. Whenever I was looking at the analytics, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was really shocked. Because the numbers between that and the next session were like staggering. So that was really cool, because that kind of showed us that, okay, people are using this to get the information that they want, which was, hey, they're like, I want to know all the fun things that we're doing during evening programming. So I definitely think the students took full ownership of that. And it's nice because the families and students had access to it. And we use tracks. So like you can stick on the family track, stick on the student track, or you can look at the full schedule. So you and I have an idea of where both of those parties are at the same time. So definitely they heavily used it for sure. So I definitely can see the changes even from last year to this year.
That's amazing. Well, Natasha, thank you very much. I mean, that's all my questions. I'm just checking here. At the moment, it doesn't look like we have any questions that have come in. I'm just triple checking. But if not, that's fine. Hopefully that means that we've done a good job of going through everything. But yeah, so if no one has any questions, and firstly, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and chat and walk through all of that. I'm super excited to kind of see how orientation continues to evolve for you, and how it, Guidebook can continue to be a part of that journey, and hopefully we can evolve with your needs as well. And that's the role of technology, is to kind of be in the background and let these things happen and be successful without dominating. We certainly don't want people, we want people to be free and to know where to go, who to talk to, how to connect, to engage with campus. So yeah, just excited to see what you do kind of in the years to come. But yeah, really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us today.
Of course, it was great to be here.
And thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, we'll be back with another Guidebook Meet soon. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and we'll see you soon. Take care.